All right, everybody. Well, welcome once again to the Rec Poker Podcast, episode 165. And we are excited that Dara O'Kearney has joined us. Those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard that name a few times, especially as we've talked about satellite things. But we're excited to actually speak with him directly and ask him some questions. And I know some of you have submitted questions, so thanks for that. As always, we are sponsored by Running Aces, Racetrack and Casino and Hotel. We're also sponsored by Learn Pro Poker and most recently by website AMP. And we'll chat a little bit about who they are later in the show. But first, let's just welcome on Dara O'Kearney, man. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
And you are actually calling in from where precisely?
Dublin, Ireland, where I live at home. This is where I live. Obviously, I travel a bit for live poker, but I've been at home for the last couple of weeks since Nottingham, and I'm heading to Madrid in a few days. But it's good to be home for a period.
What's happening in Madrid? Is that just personal, or do you got some poker tour?
No, there's a poker tournament. MPN Poker Tour are having their last ever stop there. Unfortunately, the site is closing. It's been one of my favorite tours over the last 5 years. Really good vibe on the tour. So I used to play a lot of those stops, just mostly for pleasure, I have to say, because the buy-in is a bit lower than I would normally play, but they were great fun, those stops.
Well, it's nice that you're going there to kind of help them close out and kind of end with a bang. I'm sure that's a bittersweet moment for all of those folks.
Yeah, it is for sure. My friend Clodagh has run that tour for the last few years, and she's done an amazing job. The reason why they're closing has nothing to do with the tour. The tour itself is a huge success. It's just the way online poker has gone. It's gotten more difficult for the smaller sites to survive. So unfortunately, the parent is gone.
Okay. Well, we're trying to figure out where we want to go with this interview. There's so many things. So to start, I just, there's a litany of things that you've been involved with. You're an ambassador, you're a writer, you're a player, all of those things. Kind of before we get into the strategy segment, I just want to give you an opportunity to tell us what should we know? What do you really want the Rec Poker Nation to know about who you are and what you're involved with? Because, we have people, as we've talked about, that are kind of across the spectrum, people that, are very, very regular players. They play a lot. They're plugged into the poker community. And then there's players that are just kind of hearing some of these names for the first time. And so what do you want people to know about who you are and what you're involved with?
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing to say is I'm fairly unusual in that I came to poker really late. I didn't learn the game until I was 42, which was 12 years ago. Took to it very quickly. My sort of plan taking it up was try and get good at it over a few years and maybe get competitive. But actually, it happened very fast for me. I did well online right from the start. I ran really well in my first year as well. So by the end of my first year playing, I'd moved to being a full-time professional, and I've been a full-time professional player since. Mostly an online player, I have to say, even though I do play quite a bit live, but most of my volume has been put in online over the last 12 years. Last few years, I've kind of moved into sort of content creation in different areas. I'm involved in the Chip Race podcast, which with David Lappin, my wonderful co-host. He made me say that.
Yeah. Well, we have a question about that later in the program, so we'll come back.
Yeah. So we've been doing the podcast on and off for the last, let me get this right, 5 years. We had a kind of a 2-year period in the middle of that where we weren't making, but so it's basically we made it for a year, 2 years off, 3 years back. I also write a blog, and I last year I published my first book with Barry Carter. Barry's the guy who wrote Mental Game of Poker with Jared Tendler. So we wrote the book on poker satellite strategy. And yeah, I've been an ambassador for Unibet for 3 years now. Also an ambassador for Share My Pair. And yeah, I just like to have as much diversity as possible, even though I still love playing, and playing is still my main thing on playing online in particular. I do love live poker. I love traveling to meet players. I love traveling to play. And I also love all the content creation that I do. It just makes for more diverse life, let's say, than if I just sat and clicked buttons all day, every day.
Yeah. And, all of those things, every single one of those things that you mentioned, I would love to dig into, because I have a million questions on all of those things, including the poker satellite strategy. It's a great book. I think everybody in the panel has read it. We've recommended it many times on the show because I think personally that there's a lot of value in playing satellites for recreational players, those who
100%.
who struggle to, they can get to the top 20%, but they can't, they don't have their quite mindset to win tournaments. So it's a good ROI, I think. And so we recommended that book to a lot of folks. But one thing you didn't mention is not poker related. And I have to find out, is this just a Wikipedia thing, or is this a legitimate thing? I mean, are you into like these ultra marathon things? Is that you?
Yeah. That was me for
crazy.
That was me for a while. Again, the running thing kind of happened by accident. I took up running again quite late. I think I was about 30 when I started, and I was a marathon runner for most of my 30s. Not exactly top class. I guess I was somewhere around the top 5% maybe, but no higher than that. And just did it for fun really, and to stay fit. And then at the end of my 30s, I kind of realized that I was declining as a marathon runner. And I had always wanted to run an ultra marathon just to see what it felt like, and see how it was. It turned out I was a lot better as an ultra runner than a marathon runner. It's kind of a regret that I didn't discover it earlier. But my first ultra marathon was in New York, 9 laps of Central Park, and I actually ended up winning that race. And I had a very good, let's say, 2 years as an ultra runner, where I won a few races. I ran in the World Championships for Ireland. I set a few national records. And I basically went from being a normal marathon runner to running like 24-hour races in a very quick period. And
well, of course, why wouldn't you? I mean, why would you not run for 24 straight hours?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's kind of a thread of my personality, I guess. When I get into something, I really get into it, like to a ridiculous extreme. You could even say the same for poker. Like the whole impetus for poker actually came. I was 42 years old, and I was thinking, well, there aren't any top class ultra runners in their late 40s or at least 50. So I need to find something else that I enjoy and can be competitive at. And I saw poker on TV, and, like most live poker tournaments, see people of all ages, and people seem to be competing. So I thought, okay, well, that actually looks like something that older people can do at a pretty higher level. So my original thing was, okay, well, I'll just pick up poker and I'll do it on the side. But of course, as soon as I learned it, I just got completely obsessed with the game. And before I knew it, like I was playing online 10, 12 hours a day and consuming all the books that I could find, and just got completely obsessed with poker. And as a result, poker happened much quicker than I thought, and probably shortened my running career because I couldn't really balance the two. But the running was interesting because, as you say, it's the kind of stuff that most people think is just crazy, running for 24 hours. And often not in very good conditions. Like my first 24-hour race was run in Quebec, in Canada, at the height of their summer. So, very warm, difficult enough conditions. But I found that was such a challenge mentally. That's really what appealed to me. And I think that's something which probably stood me in good stead when I moved across to poker.
Well, it's super interesting. Yet another thing we could talk hours about. Maybe next time I get the chance to go to Dublin, we can go have a Guinness at the bar and
absolutely,
hear about,
it'd be great to
or
see
at the pub.
Here.
I'm sorry, not at the bar, at the pub. We could talk more about this, but just fascinating stuff. I mean, that's one thing I've never done is I've never declined as a marathon runner. I've never once declined where I was as a marathon runner. I still am as a marathon runner. I've never declined, even despite my age. But
wow,
what that means, Dara, is I've never run one. So
okay.
What I'm saying is I've never run a day in my life. So I've never declined. But I've not had
that, yeah.
Age has never caught up with me in terms of marathoning. But
it's a very funny thing to feel to actually physically feel age.
Yeah.
Like that's I think that's something that sports people feel before everybody else, because yeah, like I said, the last marathon I ever ran, everything went perfect. I thought I was in the shape of my life. I had no illness, no injury. Conditions on the day were perfect. There was nothing I could put my finger on that I did wrong, or so all I could conclude at the end of it was, this is age catching up with me, and that's a very strange feeling.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. That's why I don't do it, because I don't want to feel age catching up with me.
Yeah.
See, it's next level thinking. I'm thinking it's chess, not checkers. Well, we'll move forward to kind of the next thing we want to do is I'm going to turn it over to, you mentioned Canada. We'll turn it over to Canadian Jim Reed, and he has a few questions that our listeners submitted for you.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, Team Canada over here representing. Thanks, Dara. We did get some feedback from some of our listeners who are big fans of yours as well. Bill Larson down in Florida, you already answered sort of how you got into poker, but what were some of the primary poker influencers in your life? And are there people or resources that really made a big difference for you when you were making the transition from ultra-marathon runner to poker player?
Yeah, there absolutely were. When I decided to take up poker, it turned out that my brother, who was living with us at the time, was already playing at a pretty high level. He was essentially playing semi-professionally. So when I found that out, that was obviously ideal because he could teach me. We always had this bizarre sibling rivalry where we would both take up the same games and then we'd play it until it became clear one of us was better than the other, and that would never change, and then the other person would give that up. So I think that's maybe why he held back that he was playing poker for me for years. But he was a very good teacher, and he taught me the fundamentals very, very quickly. And I think that's why I started so well, in addition to running well. I mean, I obviously ran well for the first year, but I think he taught me the fundamentals really well, which stood me in good stead at the time. My first friend in poker, who was a full-time professional poker player, was an Irish player called Rob Taylor. We actually started on quite a rocky foot because I put a horrendous bad beat on him in the first big tournament I ever played, which I ended up winning, which he didn't take too well. But testament to Rob, he didn't hold a grudge. We got friendly, and he taught me an immense amount in the first 2 years, particularly how to play online tournaments. He was Ireland's top sit and go player at the time, and he basically taught me everything he knew. So I would say Rob was probably the single biggest influence. Obviously, it was great to get to learn the fundamentals from my brother, but Rob taught me an absolute a lot about poker.
That's great. And we really emphasize here at Rec Poker sharing knowledge. And I think we also, the people that really know their stuff here, they learn more just by teaching it as well and by having the discussions with people that know a little less about it. So that's great. One of our listeners, David L., has a question. David Lappin, great co-host or greatest co-host of all time? Dara, to you.
Well, if they're my only options...
He was pretty clear that those were the only options.
I'm going to have to go with great co-host. It's the lesser of two evils. No, shout out to David. He is an incredible co-host. He does 90% of the work on our show.
Sweet. Yeah, we've got one of those too. That's Steve.
Yeah, you need the workhorse basically. And David does all the stuff that I don't want to do. Yeah, he's great on that stuff.
All right, well, one more from our Canadian contingent here. Chad McVean, one of my favorite people in the world, even though we've never met face-to-face. He's fantastic. Wants to thank you personally for the great satellite book. I guess he's had some success with that recently. We're curious what kind of podcasts you actually listen to now over the course of your day or week in your quote-unquote leisure time. And what do you try and get from them? What do you get from them that you can't sort of bring to your own life, as it were?
Yeah, there's probably two types of content I like. I like interviews with elite players, and I also like high-level strategy content. So I would say most of my podcast listening is directed in those areas. The first podcast I really listened to in a big way was Thinking Poker.
For sure.
I still listen to that all the time. And I've actually become friends with Andrew since. So he's a great guy. Actually, I think I met Steve briefly in Vegas outside the Rio when I was with Andrew. I have also... recently, I've gotten into listening to the Solve for Why podcast because those guys talk at a very high level. Really interesting guys, really smart guys. Also enjoy Brad Wilson's podcast, which is very recent. I can't believe how much he's put out in such a short time. But he gets great guests as well. My podcast listening in general tends to be done when I'm running, because I'm not the type of person who could sit still and listen to something. So when I'm running, it's a good chance to sort of multitask. And those are probably the ones I listen to the most at the moment. But I do actually dip in and out of all the podcasts just to see what's out there. And a lot of it is based around guests as well. A lot of the ideas for who to get on our own podcast has come from listening to people on other podcasts, and you get a sense of who would make a good guest. And so it's multifaceted, I would say. I'm genuinely interested in the content, but I also want to see, what's out there and anything we could possibly incorporate to improve our podcast.
Sure. I think a lot of our listeners also listen in a multitasking way, whether they're on a commute or doing chores around the house. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. I know John Somsky and Rob and Chris here on the panel do as well. And it's a great way to get some learning time in when you have a busy life. And, we're all recreational players, so we can't just sit down and grind out a bunch of study time every day. But what studying, this is the last question from Chad here, what studying do you do to maintain your game in a more active capacity than listening to podcasts?
I work quite a bit with the solvers. So I was an early adopter for the solvers. I was certainly the first player in my social group to sort of start working with the solvers. For me, they were sort of game changing, because up to that point in my career, let's say, if there was a spot or a hand that I was unclear on, my process was sort of to go around and ask my friends who were pros their opinions, and often you would get like 5 different opinions, and then you had to sift and decide who you believed. And it might come down to personal bias, or it might come down to who made the most convincing argument, but not that person might not necessarily be correct. When the solvers came along, and I quickly realized, if you program in the variables correctly, you can get an exact answer, an answer which is absolutely 100% mathematically accurate. For me, that seemed like a game changer. The way I've used the solvers over the years has changed. I mean, initially, I think maybe this was common for most people when they came on the scene. It was just like, oh, I'm not sure I played this hand right. Let's put it in and see what the solver would do. These days, it tends to be more situational, where I just look at certain spots, like button against blind, 20 big blinds deep. If I'm the button, I know my opening range. How should I play against different big blinds who play differently? Some guys will be tight, some guys will be loose, some guys will 3-bet their stronger hands. So when they flat, you can rule those out. Other guys will just flat super wide, and just see how you should play differently on different flops against the different player profiles. Again, my thinking on solvers has kind of moved forward as well since I started. When I started, I was sort of obsessed with game theory, and that came from a place of when I started traveling outside of Ireland and playing bigger tournaments, I felt a serious skill deficit when I played the very top guys. And then when I found out about game theory and this idea that you can, essentially play in a way which nobody can exploit you, even the better players, that was obviously very appealing. So for me, it was more sort of a defensive mechanism against better players. If I learn a GTO strategy, then, they can't really get the better of me. Last few years, I've moved more towards using the solvers to work out how I should diverge when the population are playing differently, or individual players are playing differently from the way that they're in inverted commas supposed to play. So working out specific exploits, how much you can exploit in different spots, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, most of my study is very solver based.
And we're just finishing a book study on Andrew Brokas's Playing Optimal Poker and the game theory applications there. And one thing that's jumped out to us, in particular, Rob and I were talking about this, is how much of it depends on your information about the opponent and the villain models that you're running in there, the assumptions that you make. And it's almost like a logic machine at that point. So is there anything, Chris has some more specific strategy questions we'll ask next, but just to take off from that point, do you have any tips on opponent models or like villain types or things that you might use to tighten up the assumptions that you make when you're using the solver?
Yeah, like particularly with the post-flop solvers, it's incredibly important that your ranges be accurate. So quite often I will run. Okay, let me just rewind for a minute. So when a post-flop solver in inverted commas solves a hand, it's not really solving the hand. It's just solving a toy game based on the ranges you put in, the sizings you're allowing it, and so on. So it's a kind of garbage in, garbage out model in that if the ranges are wrong and the bet sizes are not sensible, the solver will come up with the best solution for the limitations you put on it, but that won't be anything useful in the real world. So I tend to, rather than think, okay, well, this is my range and this is what I think my opponent's range is, and that's set in stone, and these are the bet sizes I think are sensible. I mean, I will start but that's just the starting point for me, and then I'll think, okay, well, I think these bet sizes are sensible, but let's assume I allow the solver to do different bet sizes from these. Let's see if there are certain bet sizes it prefers, and that might actually open up a huge leak in my own thinking, where I think, on this flop we should be betting 33%, and when you allow the solver to overbet, suddenly the solver is overbetting a lot, and then you can start investigating the reasons why that might be. That's from the point of view of the bet sizes. But then on the ranges, you might know your own range, but most of the time you will be making assumptions about the opponent. So I will start with what I think is the range, but then I'll widen it out and say, okay, well, let's say he's a good bit wider than I actually think. What kind of hands would he play? And not necessarily be binary about it. Like, you might decide, for example, I think he might play 6-4 suited, but I'm not sure about it. So I'll put 6-4 suited into the range 40% of the time, or whatever weighting you think is sensible. Similarly, what if he's tighter than I think? What if he's not actually playing the bottom of the range that I've described him? So tighten up the range and see how much the strategy changes as well. The other thing I would say is, when you're looking at solver output, don't just focus on, in inverted commas, what the right answer is, because not all mistakes are created equal. Sometimes, like the difference between, let's say, c betting on a flop or checking behind, the solver might see bet 100% of the time, but actually when you look at the EV, and it's very important to look at the EV of every option, you might see there's only a tiny difference of maybe 1/100th of a big blind between the two options. So if you do decide to check behind, you're not actually making a big error, and you're wasting a lot of time worrying about decisions that are really close. What you should really be looking for are spots that are very clear cut. And if you find a spot that's very clear cut and is not what you currently think or what you currently do, that's basically manna from heaven, because that's a major leak you've discovered in your own game, which could make a huge difference going forward. Finding out that you're supposed to check 40% and bet 60% when you weren't sure which to do, that makes no difference.
Very good. Chris, did you want to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in now. Hi, Dara. I'm Chris, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit. We always have a strategy section on our podcast, so I'm going to jump in with some questions there. And I wanted to start really, all of these questions are around satellites, but I wanted to start with sort of a more theoretical question, which came through some conversations. Do you know who Jonathan Little is? The poker player.
Yeah.
He does poker coaching. Yeah. And so he was a guest with us, and he was sort of having a conversation with us about how, he doesn't actually recommend the recreational players play satellites, because it's sort of a parlay in a sense. Like, you've got to do well in one tournament, and then you got to do well in another tournament to ever see some value come out of the purchase that you made, right? And as players who might be recreational, maybe we're less skilled. And so the idea of sort of going through and doing well in 2 tournaments is much harder than doing well in 1 tournament. So his recommendation was build your bankroll up, play in smaller tournaments until you're ready to play in bigger tournaments. What, as a person who is a satellite expert and has recommended them to recreational players, what would you say in response to sort of that idea? Why should recreational players play in satellites?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't argue with Jonathan's logic on this. I mean, he's obviously correct that a satellite is essentially a parlay, where the prize in one tournament just gets you into another tournament, and that obviously increases your variance. I would suggest that probably it applies more to pro players than to recreationals, because pro players have to worry about going broke, and they have to worry about variance and all the rest of it. So certainly a pro player, if they're only bankrolled to play, let's say, $100 tournaments, and they start playing $100 satellites to 1K tournaments, that's not a good idea, because then they're essentially playing a 1K tournament when they win a prize. But I mean, recreationals are coming from a different perspective. Recreationals are not. I don't think the recreational motivation is profit first and foremost. I think recreationals want to have a good time when they play. They want to play, big tournaments. So, if they were professionals and they were approaching this as a professional, then maybe it would be correct for them to never play anything higher than a $50 tournament in their local casino. But a lot of recreational players, they accept that they might not be plus EV in a bigger tournament. If that's true, I mean, they might be plus EV, but that's not really the objective. They want the experience of playing in a bigger tournament, and that's more fun. I mean, when you do anything recreationally, you really want to have fun. If you're a recreational tennis player, it's much more fun to go and watch the US Open than to watch two players at your level in a park, even though that might actually be more informative for you. So I would say the satellites are a great chance for recreationals to give themselves a shot at getting into the bigger tournaments that they want to play, but don't necessarily want to fork out a full buy-in. Also, the satellites in themselves tend to be very good tournaments. You can achieve much higher ROIs than most people realize in satellites. And I say that as somebody who played nothing but satellites for 2 or 3 years in my online career. And at the time, people were saying, oh, well, you can't beat satellites by more than 5 or 10%. I was beating them by 80% at the time. So it's possible to carve out large edges. It's also true, I think, that a lot of even professional players play satellites quite badly because they play them like normal tournaments. And as anybody who's read the book knows, I mean, the whole purpose of the book is to tell you what the differences are. It's not to teach you how to play poker or how to play tournament poker even. It's to teach you, okay, if you know how to play tournament poker, well, what's different about a satellite and how do you change your strategy and why? And that's stuff which even a lot of pros don't get. So I think I have definitely coached recreational players who I would back in a satellite much faster than a lot of my pro friends who just don't understand satellites.
Mm-hmm. And sort of speaking of that, I think one of the things that both your book talks about, but also I kind of want to dig a little deeper in, are these sort of like these high EV, high variance spots that as a tournament player, if it's just a straight up tournament, that there are these spots where we almost have to take them sometimes because we have to go for the win. We have to sort of, we've got to build our stack. We got to keep up with everyone else. What do you think are the key things to think about in satellites when we reach those high variance spots in general? And then I've got an example to talk about too.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to crystallize satellites into one strategic idea compared to normal tournaments, is that you're pretty much looking in all spots to reduce your variance, and not to have to take those big spots. And I think early in the book we explained how getting it all in a normal tournament early on is actually a small mistake in ICM terms, but in a satellite it's even bigger. And so satellite strategy changes right from the start, that you're not trying to win all the chips in the tournament. To win a normal tournament, you have to win all the chips, and that should be your ultimate objective. But in a satellite with, say, 20 seats, you're only basically trying to be alive when there are 20 players left. And whether you get there with one chip or you get there with half the chips in play makes no difference. So that changes the fundamental strategy. And the way that translates itself through all stages of the tournament, but even right at the start, is to avoid those high variance spots, because there's no additional benefit to having a big stack when the prizes are paid out. So, I mean, it's quite funny because the book myself and Barry are working at on the moment is a book on PKOs, or bounty builders, as they're sometimes called, and that's the polar opposite. There, you're looking to embrace variant. You're looking to take all these high variance spots because not only do you get a chance to build a stack, which is even more important in a bounty builder, because that means you then cover other players and can win their bounties. But there's also the immediate payout of the bounty when you win. So they're the absolute opposite. So I kind of think of it in terms of like there's a variance dial where in a normal tournament, let's say that's set to 50. In a satellite, you want to turn that down. So it goes down below 50 depending on the stage of the satellite. But in a PKO, you're actually turning it the other way. You're ramping up the variance.
And so sort of like jumping into that, I want to give you an example. I played in a satellite yesterday, and I've got a hand from it, which I hope we can just talk about a little.
Sure.
So there are 5 spaces paid in this satellite, and we're down to 9 left.
Okay.
And there are 2 extreme short stacks at the table, so they're under 5 big blinds. And there are 3 really big stacks, over 50 big blinds, and 4 of us are kind of in the middle fighting for those last 2 spots, all in that kind of, probably we all have 15 to 25 big blinds. Does that kind of give you a sense of the table at least? And I'll give you the hand here.
Very much, yeah.
Okay.
That tells me. The first thing you're always looking for in the spot is how big ICM is, and that really comes down to how far you are from the bubble and what the other stacks are.
Yeah. So there were 4 spots away. There's 2 that are almost, they're going to have to get lucky to not be eliminated, and then there's 4 of us who are fighting for sort of basically 2 spots left if the 3 massive stacks don't get foolish, which we can talk about later because one of them did. But and we're at the 500, 1,000, 1,000 level, and I'm in the cutoff with 16K, so I have 16 big blinds. Under the gun +2, who has 22 big blinds, opens to 2,500. The hijack, who's one of those massive 50+ big blind stacks, calls. And again, I'm in the cutoff, and I look down at Ace of Hearts, King of Clubs. And so there are 3 people left to act behind me, including one of those massive stacks and one of those extreme short stacks. And in a regular tournament, I fist bump jam this, and I'm just excited to see what happens. I'm hoping that my squeeze sort of folds these people out. But I'm wondering, is this a spot in a satellite where a flat is potentially better? Or because we're reducing our variance, we'll see if we hit one of those aces or kings, or is this still a spot where we really need to do the best sort of EV play and have that squeeze jam work for us? We're getting short. We're not, we've got to make some moves to sort of survive. How do we approach spots like this in satellite when we're getting down to it?
Sure, yeah. First of all, I want to say I like the way you're thinking about it. You're thinking about the 2 possibilities and how this could be different. That's very true. And you did say correctly that we do want to reduce our variance in satellites. Now, that said, when I start teaching that to a lot of people, they go through a phase where they overdo that, and they suddenly start making insane folds or flats based on reducing variance. Essentially, what you're doing in a satellite is you are moving the line, but not completely eradicating certain ranges, except in rare spots. Now, the crux of this spot is the way the stacks are distributed. The way you've described it, 3 guys are essentially locked up. And 2 guys are essentially no hopers. So, and there are 4 of you competing for the remaining 2 seats. So you guys are, if assuming it plays out the way it normally will, you guys are essentially 50-50 for a seat. So because you're only 50% for a seat, you have to play more normally than, let's say, this was a situation where you were 90% for a seat and you were up against another big stack. Then the strategy would warp completely, and shoving ace king would be insane. But in this spot, you're you don't have to diverge that much. The other thing is, in terms of variance reduction, moving all in is actually one way of you can potentially reduce variance, because if you can fold out hands that had good equity against you pre-flop, that's a great result for you, and the way you do that is all in. And typically the way your strategy changes as you move towards the bubble of a satellite is you move all in with more hands that you would play more that you would be more tempted to slow play, let's say, if it were near the bubble. Ace king in particular is a hand that really likes moving all in, because a lot of the hands that it folds out are hands that actually have very good equity against it, like pocket pairs, or even the random jack 10 suited has pretty good equity against ace king. It's also a hand that has to hit on the flop to be able to continue. So in this spot, calling can be just a bit leaky. So I would actually rule out calling and just move all in. Had it been a different situation where you were 90% locked up, I would then say it was a it was a choice between either calling or folding, and all in would be the worst option.
And does that change if we have something more marginal? Like, does a hand like Ace Jack become? Are we considering flatting with that, or is that still a hand that we are either jamming or folding in this kind of spot with a satellite sort of consideration?
Yeah, the way we're going to change our strategy in general is, I would say 2 points. First of all, we're going to jam more of our range because it's really good for us when everybody folds and we don't risk elimination. So because of that, we're going to jam more of our range. But we are going to avoid jamming marginal hands. So our range changes in the sense that, like, some super strong hands, which we might consider trapping or doing something different with other than jamming, now become jams. But the bottom of our jamming range in a normal tournament probably just becomes a fold, because we just want to avoid those marginal spots. Because a hand like Ace Jack, even as a flat, doesn't particularly do very well, because if the flop comes Ace high or even Jack high and all the chips go in, there's a significant chance we don't have the best hand. It's not a hand we can play too confidently just when we hit top pair. So you're better off folding the sort of bottom of your normal tournament range, for want of a better word, and then shoving more of your top of the range hands.
And then sort of last bit, which I think is something that I see in satellites all the time. So I ended up qualifying, thanks. But it was thanks to 2 big stacks sort of blowing up against each other.
Good to hear that still happens.
And so I actually wanted to talk about that from their perspective, and like how we can avoid this as when we've got those stacks where we're locked up and we end up with a really big hand and we're just sort of battling with other big stacks while these sort of little stacks get in, like, are kind of praying that we keep this up. Like, how do you sort of turn off that sort of conventional, or how do you recommend to people that they turn off that sort of instinctual or conventional way that they approach normal tournaments, especially when they've got those sort of, like, because this was 2, basically what happened was there were 2, the blinds had gone up. So they had 2 about 45 big blind stacks. There was somebody with 3 big blinds, and I had 11 big blinds left. And I was by far and away, like, next on the chopping block. And we were down to 7 left. So there were 5 spots, 7 left. We were the 2 clear people who needed to go away, and then everyone could have their slots. But what happened was, they just got in a raising war when on a King 10-3 flop, one of them had Ace King, one of them had King Queen, and the King Queen player left broke, and I was happy to not and to qualify. But I'm wondering how when we're in those positions as these giant stacks, how we approach that in tournament. I mean, do we just shut down completely?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's very hard to switch out of the normal mindset and to play differently. But the one thing I would say is that when you're playing a satellite, focus on what the objective is. The objective is to, in a 5-player satellite, come in the top 5 places. No difference between coming first and coming 5th. So, it might feel annoying to have to keep folding because the other big stack is pushing people around, but that makes no difference at the end of the day. Let him do the work in that case. He's taking all the risk of stacks. Getting into a confrontation with him makes absolutely no sense, and I would say that's the main thing to focus on. I mean, this has gotten less over the years, but it's good to see, first of all, that it still happens, because a large part of the value you can have in satellites is understanding not to do these huge mistakes, and they're absolutely humongous mistakes. I think I gave this example in the book, but the first time I ever saw this was, I guess, my 2nd or 3rd year playing. The first time I qualified for the World Series main event online, back when they ran satellites on Stars for that, and it was like one of these 1,000 runner fields that had 50 packages guaranteed, but I think they ended up having 54 payouts in the end. So it was actually quite a tense satellite for me because I was relatively short stacked the whole way, and then got pretty lucky with I think 6 from the bubble, where I got in ace king against ace king and actually won. So that kind of made me relatively safe. But I was keeping an eye on all the other tables and to see who was at risk and so on. And I mean, my objective was just to finish in the top 54, so I knew I had to just basically fold everything. On our table, the biggest stack in the tournament was playing every single hand. He's obviously having fun because he can. And so he's opening every hand, and people were just folding. I mean, I would have folded aces if I had to, because my assessment at that stage was if I kept folding, I was pretty much 100%. And if I got aces in against this guy's 2 random cards, he's going to dog me 18% of the time or whatever. So it was fairly clear to me what my strategy should be. But the last hand of the satellite was one of the most insane things I've ever seen. So I'm looking at the other tables, and I see the shortest stack in the tournament has less than 1 ante left. So he's going to be all in for a partial ante next hand. And even if he wins that, he's going to have less than a big blind, which he's going to have to post the hand after that. So you kind of think, okay, well, the tournament's over. He's screwed, obviously. And then on our table, where the chip leader was opening every single hand, he opened again. So 1 of 55, and 3 of 55, who was also on our table, decided to defend the big blind, which is immediately weird. Like, why even get involved? And then the flop came down something like king deuce 3. And the big blind, who was covered, the covered player, just open shoved for 20 times the pot. And the other guy tanked and eventually called. The open shover kings, so okay, he's flopped the nuts on the flop. The other guy, turns out rather sickly, has aces and hits running wheel cards to eliminate the guy with kings. Absolute insanity. I mean, the guy literally lit $14,000 on fire, which is the value of the package. Now, I told that story to a couple of people at the time, and most of them focused on how unlucky the kings was, saying, "Oh, well, I mean, the guy's opening every hand, and like, how does he have aces?" And then we flop top set, and the guy hits runner. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is just fold your kings pre-flop. Yeah. There is absolutely no reason. There is no upside to winning a few more chips. Against the one player at the table who could potentially knock you out.
Well, and even the aces calling there is sort of odd too. But yeah,
the aces calling is insane.
The whole thing is screwed up.
The whole thing is screwed up. Yeah, yeah, because the aces would have been relatively short and could potentially, if the other guy had somehow survived the next 2 hands, could potentially have been at risk. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the times people just can't check their ego. They enjoy, or they won't be pushed around in inverted commas, and that's that's a foolhardy approach sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's actually part of the dynamic that was playing out at this table too. Is that the button who had the ace king had just been super active. He was the biggest stack of the table. I think people were tired of folding to him, and it ended up being this giant sort of shove war where it really, I mean, you got king queen, you got to fold that there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I thought when you started telling the story, I thought you were going to say that one guy set or set the other guy or something. Yeah, getting in king queen in that spot is just insane.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thanks. I think that's really helpful. I think it's really helpful for the sort of rec player to just be thinking about satellite strategy. I really liked what you talk about, thinking about what your ultimate goal is too. Like that it doesn't matter if you're pushing back against the big stack bully. Yeah. All you care about is, reaching that finish line.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of the logical piece that we keep trying to teach everybody in our principles and all these things. What are you ultimately trying to accomplish, whether it's in this particular hand, this particular decision, or in this case, more broadly with this tournament? The ultimate goal is to survive. Yeah, but yeah, I think testosterone or whatever it is kind of kicks in, and I'm not going to be pushed around by this guy anymore, and we let that. That's a form of tilt, right? I mean, that's a form of tilt.
It completely is, yeah. I mean, I've been lucky enough to share a house the last few World Series with Andrew Brokos, and Andrew's really good on this stuff because Andrew goes even further and says, like, people shouldn't even use emotive language to describe hands. That in itself is an indication of an issue. If you start saying this guy was pushing me around, or I have to make a stand, or I didn't want to appear weak, describing what a strategy game in emotional terms is definitely a pointer that you may have a mental issue.
That's so good. Well, we need to honor your time, so we're going to kind of start wrapping it up here. But I guess a couple of things to touch base with you on. First of all, now I've heard your name pronounced so many different ways. I believe that you say Dara, I think, but it's like I've heard like 70-30, Dara and Dara. And so we just need to settle this for all of Rec Poker Nation right now. Do you go by Dara or do you go by Dara?
It's Dara, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an Irish name, and that is pronunciation. Actually, the second name people generally get wrong as well because of the EA, which looks like E, but it's actually pronounced just like an A. So it's Carney, as in somebody who works in a carney.
So I think I said that wrong too. So Dara O'Kearney.
That's it. Yeah, perfect.
O'Kearney.
Pronunciation there.
Well, I got to practice for our pub visit. See,
absolutely,
I got to practice for these things. So, well, I guess before we kind of get into the real final things, any final words, things that you would have loved to have shared with our folks that we didn't get around to asking, or anything follow up, any kind of final words for our audience?
No, I guess like I would say that like when you're a recreational player, it's. I think recreational players are often patronized in the sense that people, assume that they're not capable of playing at a high strategic level. That hasn't been my experience at all. I think recreational is just a matter of how much time you're going to put into something and your reasons for doing it, which is that you just want to essentially enjoy yourself, and you make your livelihood in some other way. So I would say for recreational players, the most important thing is just make sure you're always having fun. Do the things which give you the fun, but also it's actually more fun when you understand the game better and you give yourself a better chance of winning. So recreational players who are interested in strategy, that's really that's a sweet spot because you're having the fun, but you're also willing to put a bit of work and effort into the game. I coach quite a few recreations, and I have to admit I prefer coaching recreational players to other pros. And even when I play live, I generally prefer the company of recreational players because as a pro, it's very easy to get up in your own head and focus on how badly you're running or how unlucky you think you are or how much work you put in or how horrible the casino is, all these other things, because it's essentially your work. But recreationals are there to have fun, and poker's fairly unique in the sense that it's one of the few areas where recreational players and pros do compete in the same arena. If you're a recreational tennis player, you can't show up at the US Open and expect them to let you in. But you show up in Vegas with your buy-in, they let you in, and you could be at the same table as Phil Ivey. I think that's the thing which is the most fun, both for me, but also I imagine recreational players. And I think that's the thing to focus on. Just bear in mind that it's actually supposed to be fun.
I love that so much. More than you realize. I love that. Now it's always more fun to win, which is what we're trying to tell people. Like, as a recreational player, go out and have fun. Like, that's ultimately what we're doing. But it turns out it is more fun to win, so you can still improve at the game. You can have fun and then have more fun when you're at the payout desk.
Sure. And I also think it's actually fun to approach it as a strategy game rather than just a game of dumb luck. Because if it was a game of dumb luck, go off and play bingo or roulette or something else. But the thing about poker is it is a strategy game, and the better you get at the strategy, the more time and effort and thought you put into it, the better you will do. So it rewards that kind of effort. And I think for recreational players, that's also true. I mean, there's sometimes an assumption among pro players that recreations don't care about strategy, or if they do, they're bad at it. But when recreational players are perfectly capable of consuming content as well and operating at a very high strategic level, it's a question of approach. It's not necessarily a question of how much time you put into something. It's how you approach it.
Well, and you find that a lot of recreational players they're recreational because they have other jobs, and a lot of times those other jobs are in very strategic capacities in other companies. I mean, a lot of us have grown up, learning strategy and learning how to think strategically, and so to sort of undervalue that could be a mistake by some of the pros. We're just trying to apply our strategy to a new construct.
For sure. Yeah, in fact, I would say probably the biggest change over the 11 or 12 years of my career is that the recreational level has improved incredibly. Recreational players are so much better now than they used to be. Poker is a natural evolutionary pool anyway, where the the weaker players will tend to get weeded out over time because they just reach a point where they either can't lose anymore or they don't want to go on losing. It's just not a pleasant experience for them. So, but I would say the recreationals have improved far more than the pros have in the same time, because they're recreationals can consume content much more now than when I started. When I started, it was actually quite difficult to get good at poker because there were no training videos. There were very few good poker books. There were no solvers. There was none of that stuff. There were no podcasts. So it's a lot easier, I think, for recreationals who are motivated enough to put in a bit of work now to get up to more or less pro level.
For sure. Well, any other comments, questions from the panel before we let Dara go? Head shaking. All right. Well, Dara, so tell us this has been fantastic. We could go on for hours. We always, at the end of these things, I always get all these emails and all these these comments from people saying, how do I get a hold of that person? So we're trying to be a little more preemptive in giving them that information. So what's the best way or the preferred way that you'd have people connect with you that are saying, all right, I need to tap into what this guy's doing?
Yeah, I would say probably the central thing for pretty much everything I do is it makes its way onto Twitter somehow. So when I put out a video or a new article or a new edition of my strategy newsletter or a new blog or whatever, a new podcast, I tweet about it. So I would say in terms of like just seeing what I'm doing in total, Twitter is probably the best place. From there, you can fan out to whatever interests you, be that the books, the podcast, the blog, the articles I write, any of that stuff. But I do also have a presence the last 2 years on Instagram, actually at the instigation of Diva, my friend who you had on earlier. She suggested I should get on Instagram because it was so different from Twitter. The way I use Instagram is literally just as a sort of a Dear Diary, where I show snaps from my day so people can see what I'm up to. If I'm away at a tournament, what my table's like, or if I'm out sightseeing, what I'm seeing. When I'm at home, what I'm up to that day, if I'm playing, if I'm grinding online, if I'm doing coaching, whatever. So I've actually been surprised at the reaction to that, how many people are interested. But I think people are sort of interested in the sort of like real life. This is what it's actually like to be a pro poker player. So if you like that sort of stuff, I would go to Instagram. But for most of the stuff, Twitter handle is just my name, Dara O'Kearney, all one word. On Instagram, I think I'm Joe Kearney. So they're probably the two main areas.
All right. Well, sounds great. And I'll put links out in the show notes. And if you have any other links you want me to put out there, Dara, feel free to send me stuff. And if you guys are out there going, okay, I missed it, how do I get a hold of them? Just get a hold of us. We'll connect you with Dara. But Dara, thank you. I know you're up late, which isn't rare for a poker player, but still appreciate you accommodating our schedule and joining us. This was fantastic.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been great fun talking to you all.
All right. Well, we're going to continue on and wrap up with some announcements. You're welcome to stay for that, or you're welcome to just go ahead and take off, and we'll connect later. And hopefully we can check in with you sometime in the future.
Sure, for sure. And hopefully see some of you in Vegas.
We'll be there. All right, Dara, take care.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, what are our reactions? What are we thinking? I thought it was just a fantastic. Now, Dara's still on there, so I have to say this. Once he logs off, I'll tell you what I really felt. But no, I thought that was a fantastic discussion. What was some of your guys' key takeaways from that?
I thought it was really hilarious that Chad McVean was asking questions because he was just on the chip race. Not 3 episodes ago or something? Right,
this guy, McVean. Come on, man.
When I saw that, I thought, oh, this is funny. He was just on the Chip Race podcast.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, reactions?
No, I love listening to Dara. Him and Andrew both. I think you've been on Thinking Poker podcast too, haven't you, Dara?
Yeah.
I've been on it. So, I mean, you guys, I love the way you guys think. I love the way you guys explain it to us rec players who are not thinking at a Matt Berkey level, So it's, I really enjoy listening to you guys.
Yeah, I'm always interested in this concept that you're not actually always lowering your variance by calling. and the importance of shoving in spots like that can actually turn out to be a lower variance play. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. You said something like shoving your stack in to make it less likely that you were eliminated. And I just love that. I love that way of thinking about it. That's exactly right.
Little paradigm shifting. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, so let's talk a little bit about some other stuff. So let's talk about our membership content that we have going on. And Chris, I'll let you take the lead on that. Give us an update on what's going on with our pretty exciting stuff for membership.
Yeah. So we've just completed, last week completed our seminar recording. So we got our first seminar. It's going to be posted this week for all our members. We're talking about position and stacks. We're going back to the basics. And as kind of a reminder, what we're planning is a series of monthly seminar content to prepare you for your first big MTT, or if it's even not your first one, maybe get you refreshed in order to get you ready for the WSOP or wherever your next big shot might be, whether you're going to try that through a satellite qualifying in or just plunking down the money and trying your best. We're going to be having monthly content kind of getting you ready for that. And our first effort at that is is our February content, which is focused all around the idea of getting a refresher and refocused on the idea of being positionally aware and stack aware and how those two things interplay. And we had a great time recording it. It's, I think, really, if I do say so myself, I think it's really solid content. And I'm really excited for it to come out and for y'all to see it.
Yeah, it was so fun to create. I just thought it was so much fun, and I think it's really a tribute to you and the preparation that went in, but the whole crew. And I love that it was still done had the sense of we're doing this in community. We're all learning this together, and that's really what we're inviting all the listeners into is join us. We're a community of people learning the game together. That's we're vibrant, we're encouraging, but we're inviting people in. And I thought it had that feel. And then a lot of this is leading up to for members again, end of the month, right? We're going to do this live Q&A. And inviting the members to be part of that too.
Yeah, so we hope that people watch the content, engage with it, and then come up with questions that you felt like we're missing. And we're going to have these live Q&As at the end of every month so that we can wrap up the content and move on to the next one. And all the content is meant to build on each other. So it will be great to have that sort of that wrap-up Q&A, which will then feed into the next month's content. So we're excited about it.
For sure. Well, how about the book study, Rob? How's that going?
Well, we're going to be going through chapter 8 in our next episode. And it's called Putting It All Together. That's the last chapter of the book. We had a very interesting conversation, the previous one in chapter 7. John and I were talking about that on Saturday. We got together and we were talking about that. And it was a very confusing chapter for us. We were struggling a lot with the concepts. I mean, some of it's getting pretty deep right now. It's one of those books that I know that I'm going to have to read a number of times to get to where we want to be with it. But we're going through the last chapter. It's called Putting It All Together in our next episode. And we're working on trying to get Andrew Brokus on with us to do a Q&A on the book after we're all done and we've gone through the whole thing. So we'll see how that turns out. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And he's already committed to doing it. So he's just a matter of working out the date. So,
Right.
So Playing Optimal Poker, for those of you who haven't been part of the Rec Poker Nation, that's the book that Cheyenne Bhattacharya has been leading, and Rob and John have been part of the whole time. And some of us have been kind of in and out, and it's really challenging our thinking, right? But it's like introducing GTO, but in a way that makes sense. So we understand the foundations. But yeah, it's still heady stuff.
Really is a lot of fun though. I mean, like I said, John and I were having a conversation on Saturday about it. We were both kind of confused about where we were at, what's going on, but he really lays it out really well using those toy games, he calls them. So yeah, I really enjoy it. And you should, if you get a chance, definitely read the book, Play Optimal Poker. And if you can, join the book study. If you're a member, you can go back and listen to all the chapters as we've talked and discussed what was going on in them. So,
yeah. Well, good stuff. Well, thanks, Rob, for doing that. Thanks for giving the update. How about John? How about you on the Poker Stars home games? What do you got to share on that deal?
Well, yeah, we, as hopefully everyone knows by now, we have 2 different home game series on the first and second Wednesday of the month. The first home game series is our No Limit Hold'em home game series, and the second home game series is our mixed game home game series. And we have a points race that is being tracked on rec.poker, so you can go there and see who's the current winner there. One note is that PokerStars does keep some score of things in their home games. We are not using those scoring mechanisms at all. So whatever you see there, just ignore what you see in the client. Go to rec.poker. That's the official scoring for that. The games have been posted, so you can go ahead and sign up. And if you are new to No Limit Deuce to 7 single draw, there is a nice, small little 10-minute or less video to introduce you to the game. Now, of course, after winning or listening to that, you will be a world-class player at the game and, can make millions of dollars. But it'll at least let you know what the rules are, how the game is played, that you actually, don't want to have the best hand in that particular game, and that, you don't want a straight, all of those types of things. So it'll at least let you understand the rules so that then you can come and have fun at the game.
Yeah, and all of that stuff, rec.poker and then home game, go there. And John put that video together. It's fantastic. We've had great feedback. People like, thank you so much for doing that. Yeah, that's a great little tutorial for those of us who are just learning mixed games. And I'm really excited that we're doing this. Like, we've had a lot of people for a while say, you guys should do mixed games. And I'm like, I don't know mixed games. I'm still trying to learn one game. But this has been very well received. And John, thanks for putting all this together and leading all that effort. It's an effort, but I know you love doing it.
And just remember, you don't need to be an expert to play these games. No one here knows what they're doing when it comes to Deuce
come
to
on,
7
Somsky.
No, I might know the rules at least, because I've played poorly a few times. But, it's just so much fun, and you get to kind of stretch your mental muscles because you aren't thinking about, okay, should my range include ace-jack offsuit, or should I cut it off at ace-queen offsuit here? Or, because at No Limit Hold'em, even as recreational players, we have evolved to kind of a high level. Mm-hmm. It's kind of nice to go back to where no one knows what they're doing. And it actually makes you think and exercise different mental muscles. And I firmly believe that when you play some of the mixed games, you can bring information that you learn back into your Hold'em game as well.
And speaking of not knowing what you're doing, I did watch that little teaser trainer video that you put out there, and it was so good. I've already decided I can't watch any of the other ones going into these mixed games, because my whole thing is that I'm not going to know anything about the game until the first hand is dealt, and I already know way too much about this game from watching that little video. So if you want to be boring and understand the rules of the game before you start playing, watch John Somsky's video clip there. And if you want to have fun like Bluff Sterini and show up and splash around, just show up on the day of and come and be a fool like me. It's a lot of fun.
And it's so fun. For those of you who are members, I know you appreciate this. Like a number of us are recording our thoughts as we're playing these. And it's so fun. I think from the Hold'em side, it was so great. I think there's a lot of great insight, a lot of great strategy. When we played the PL Hold'em, PLO combo, John's is great because he knows what he's doing. For some of us who aren't big Omaha people, it was funny, like Chris raising his hand. There's still the one spot, Chris, where you're like, oh, let's see who won. Nope, I guess it wasn't me, And I think there's some of that going on. So from it's just sort of a fun thing too, as as we're learning the mixed games, to go back and listen to some of that. But good times, man, just super fun. And then there's all the bragging rights that go on, and all the talking trash on Discord and that sort of thing is pretty fun as well.
Plus, I think didn't a first timer win it last time? Didn't another Canadian sneak in under the wire? Maddie came in and just showed up and won the whole damn thing.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's get some more Canadians out here kicking these butts. Yeah, exactly.
I have to sing "Oh Canada" now on the
once a month. That's the rule.
Nice. But yeah, thanks, John, for all that stuff. I'll mention we got some new supporters. Chad McVean, like if you're not supportive enough, Chad is now supporting us on Patreon. So Chad, appreciate you. Obviously, it was great to meet you in Vegas last summer, and appreciate all that you're doing and supporting Rec Poker. But more than that, the poker industry as a whole, and all the podcasts you listen to and retweet and encourage people about. So thanks for doing that. And then in January, we added a few new members to our community. So the folks that we're talking about, where they're watching the content and engaging and being part of the Q&A. So I want to thank those guys. So Rob Delaney, George Stanford, a.k.a. Grandpa George, never play Ace King George, and Michael Babker, those three folks from Minnesota. Thank you guys for jumping on here and being members. Keith Brandt from Illinois, Rich Yelenich from Washington, and Yamel Cuevas from New York. So thank you to all of you guys for signing up for membership. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, Steve at rec.poker or wherever, get in touch with us. And we got the Binks and the Player of the Week. Now we have 2 weeks in a row we have to report on because, as you know, last week we recorded with Fedor Holtz and we recorded on a Saturday, so we didn't have the Player of the Week. So we said we'd catch up this time. So the week of January 21st, Running Aces Players of the Week, Alberto Briones Moraz, who's on just a heater. You'll hear his name a few times. He led the way, followed by Keith Kiesling, Daryl Winningstead, Joseph Farrell, and Mark Harvanko. So they pick up Running Aces bonus lammers for their Player of the Week status. And then last week, the week of January 27th, Andrew Feist, who is part of Rec Poker Nation, he was wearing the hat. Alberto, who, again, I should mention is part of Rec Poker Nation. He's got the sweatshirt on all the time. Al Anderson, and then a 3-way tie between Tim Bray, Dave Elke, and Louise Lucas. So those are your Running Aces Players of the Week. And then we always invite you guys, if you're part of our community, to put out in Discord in the Bink channel. You can put out there the wins that you've had, and we like to celebrate those as a community. So I'll go through the list pretty quick. But January 27th, Alberto turned $75 into 400 and 4 bounties in their bounty tournament. The next day, Alberto conquered the $30 tournament, winning $320. January 28th, Andrew Feist, another guy who's always wearing our merch, he turned $150 into 2,000 as part of a partial chop. Brian Morey took down the $60 PLO, turned that into $450. Andrew Feist again, 100 into 1406. Chris Jones, I'm going to put you on there. You didn't even put your Bink in there, but the qualifier, the 90 into 350 or so. Chris Nelson, also, who's a supporter of Rec Poker Nation, he also won a seat with you in that one. And today, I'm going to end up mentioning him twice because he'll be there next week. But today, I played the $75 bounty tournament. I final tabled, but I fell short. But Brian Soja, sporting the Rec Poker sweatshirt, he took it down for $742, and it looked to be about 10 bounties. So pretty good couple of weeks there at the tables for Rec Poker Nation. I do want to mention, I mentioned this website, AMP, is our newest podcast sponsor. And I just want to mention, so that's Mark Prashan. He's a supporter of Rec Poker, and he's coming on board to help us with some website stuff. And we're excited to work with him. He's just a fantastic dude. And Website AMP is really a company that he owns that's designed to amplify, since the AMP, amplify your impact on the web, professional website design, development, and optimization services. And so you can talk to a website expert for free at websiteamp.com/recpoker. So check that out. Let me know if you have any questions on that deal. But thanks to Mark for being part of the team here at Rec Poker. So I got a couple other things, but you guys on the panel, anything that we're missing, any sort of updates or announcements that you want to give the nation? Shaking heads. All right. Well, the one more thing I wanted to add on here is we are having our first Rec Poker Day at Running Aces. So you guys know they're our official sponsor. And so Saturday, February 29th, we are still putting all the details together, but basically from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., we're going to be on site. We're going to be recording. If you want to come over and say hi on the podcast, we're going to be giving away merchandise, talking to people about membership. I'll be playing both tournaments. So there'll be bounties on my head. If others are going to be there, there'll be bounties on you guys. But just going to be a fun day, kind of celebrating door prizes. Running Aces is going to be giving away some lammers as door prizes, so which is basically just tournament chips. So make sure you check that out. We'll give you more details as we get closer. Jim, what do you have to say about people connecting with us?
Well, there's a lot of great ways to do it. I don't need to tell you, Steve. The number one, rec.poker. Go to rec.poker. We've got all sorts of free links there. That's where we have the launch for our membership site. You can come and sign up there for a trial for free and come and see all the great stuff that we're doing behind the wall there. Discord is a huge help for discussion. We've been doing a lot of great hand discussions and talking about hand histories and tournament positions, concepts, other great stuff. So go to Discord, and it's Rec Poker, easy to find there. Sign up for the newsletter. Steve puts out a newsletter every week. This week in Rec Poker, twerp. And twerps like me enjoy getting it. It gives us a rundown of everything that's coming out that week and links to everything. So if you don't always want to be surfing in between sites and that to find out where the things are that we're putting out, be a twerp with me, and you can find all your links right there. Of course, Twitter @RecPoker. And if you're on Twitter, go over to @Dara O'Kearney and just tell him, hey, we heard you on Rec Poker, and boy, that was nice of you to come and share your wisdom with us. And then he'll get this great feedback, and he'll think, wow, those Rec Poker guys were a really good thing for me to do. I'm going to go tell all my friends to go on their podcast. So, Twitter, rec.poker, Discord, and those are the big ones. But, of course, we're on Facebook, SoundCloud, YouTube. Basically, just find a way to reach us, and we'll be there with open ears.
Sounds good. And then next week we have coming up KL Cleaton. Really excited to chat with him. He's done a little bit with our videos for us, but he has partnered with Ryan LaPlante, and KL sort of started this Range Trainer Pro. It's a tool that he's given us couple of us access to. It's fantastic. Highly recommend in terms of how do you figure out what ranges you should be opening with in different spots. And so we're going to talk with KL. So if you have questions for KL, specifically around opening ranges or other things, make sure you send those to us one way, shape, or form. The preferred way is Steve @rec.poker, but if you put them on Twitter or Facebook, we'll gather them and we'll put them out there. But if you have questions, man, here's your opportunity to ask for some of the brightest minds in poker. So check that out. And if you want to support us, Patreon is a great way to do that. Obviously, we put out a ton of content for free, and that helps us pay the bills and kind of give us your vote of encouragement. You can go to rec.poker/Patreon for information there. You can rep the brand. We got sweatshirts. We got hats. We make it as cheap as possible for you to rep the brand. You can like us, rate us, review us on iTunes. All that stuff helps. We put out links to 888 Poker articles every week. You can like those, retweet those, and just let people know. And the thing that we always say is if there's things that you'd like to see us do more of or less of or differently, tell us. We don't know. We're a group of recreational players trying to put on the best show that we can while we're enjoying each other's company. But if you have feedback that's going to help us get better, please let us know. That's how we'll know. So with that, we'll sign off there. A special thanks, as always, to our official sponsor of all things Rec Poker, Running Aces Racetrack, Casino, and Hotel, and also to our podcast sponsors, Learn Pro Poker and website AMP. So with that, guys, thank you so much, and we will catch you next week.